Stained glass flowers with stems are a beautiful project, but they involve techniques you might not have tried before. Whether you're new to stained glass or getting back into it after a break, I'll walk you through each step with helpful tips to make the process easier. Along the way, I'll share practical advice on how to build your confidence and get back into the swing of things, all while creating a bouquet of wild roses. Tip number 1, start with a project that excites you. One of the best ways to rekindle your creativity is to pick a project you're genuinely excited about. Whether it's something small and simple, or a piece that's been on your mind for a while, choose something that makes you eager to create. For me, these wild roses were the perfect choice. I love their delicate look, and they feel like a fresh start. Early in my 3.5-year hiatus, I was seeing so many stemmed flowers on Pinterest. I decided then that I wanted to make some when I got back to glass. So a few weeks before filming, I pulled out my iPad and got to sketching these patterns of wild roses for my own version of stemmed flowers. Now I'm drawing lines to show the natural direction of the petals on the paper pattern before I cut the pieces apart. This will help me determine which direction to lay each piece on the glass to ensure the flower looks as natural as possible once it's assembled. If you're using opalescent glass with varying colors like I am here, you'll want to hold the glass up to the light to see the colors accurately before deciding where to place your pattern pieces. Alternatively, you could use a light box, which is what I usually do. However, since these aren't sun catchers, I wasn't overly concerned about that in this case. For more information on using a light box, check out my video on using a light box for stained glass by clicking the card in the right upper hand corner of this video. Tip number 2, don't stress about perfection. After a break, it's easy to feel like you've lost your touch. The first few cuts might be rough, and your hands might not feel as steady as they used to, but that's okay. Just like riding a bike, your muscle memory will come back. Instead of stressing over perfection, focus on getting back into the rhythm of creating. Be willing to overlook small imperfections. Minor cutting mistakes can often be corrected on the grinder or hidden when soldering. If a larger mistake happens, simply cut the piece again. It's frustrating, but it's part of the craft. And it does happen to everyone, whether they admit it or not. I lucked out here and was able to reuse the same piece of glass. I just had to clean off my lines, retrace the pattern, and start cutting again. Some of the rose petals have tight inside curves that regular grosing pliers don't fit into, so you'll see me using narrow-tipped ones to remove the excess glass here. If you'd like more guidance on using grosing pliers effectively, I have a video on that. Just click the card in the top right of your screen. As I cut the small green pieces for the bottom of the flower, you'll notice they're smaller than the squares of the grid I'm working on. Since my grid is rather large and I don't want to move it for just 1 or 2 pieces, I use another piece of glass as a base to work on top of. If you find tiny pieces like this too fiddly, you could skip them for this design, but personally, I think that little touch of green at the base of the flower adds an extra level of detail that makes it worth the effort. Tip number 3. Give yourself time to get back into the flow. Rushing through a project can lead to frustration if things don't go smoothly. Take your time, enjoy the process, and don't expect to work at the same pace you did before your break. The goal isn't speed, it's getting comfortable again. Before my medical issues, I could easily work in the studio for 8 to 10 hours a day. A project like this wouldn't have been a challenge. I could have cut all of the pieces in one afternoon without any fatigue or strain. But, none the wiser, I expected to pick up right where I left off. That didn't quite happen. I did manage to cut all the pieces in one day, but I had to break it up. I cut 2 flowers in one afternoon and the other along with the little bud in the evening. By the end, my hands and arms were exhausted. In hindsight, I should have spread the work over 2 days, but we learn as we go. Now remember those tight inside curves where I used my narrow jaw grousing pliers? I'm also going to use my 1/4 inch grinding bit because my 3/4 inch bit is a little too large to fit inside the groove. On my glass star grinder, the 1/4 inch bit sits above the 3/4 inch bit, so I need to keep it wet while grinding. To do this, I hold a sponge against the bit while I work. This prevents glass dust in the same manner as the sponge does when it's in the base of the machine. The only thing to remember is if you're doing a lot of grinding this way all at once, keep a small dish of water nearby to occasionally rinse and re-wet the sponge. Tip number 4, make small skills feel like a win. If you've been away from stained glass for a while, even simple skills like foiling can feel unfamiliar. Treat these smaller steps as confidence boosters. Each little success, whether it's placing your foil evenly on the glass, varnishing it smoothly, or trimming your tips and tail seamlessly, reinforces your skills and helps rebuild your momentum. Now, I'm sure you've heard the same best practices that I have, which is to keep your foils stored in airtight packaging. I used to go through foil rolls so quickly that I always kept them in my dispensers, just exposed to the air. When I stepped away from the studio for a few years, it never occurred to me to store them any differently. I just didn't think about it. So there they sat in open containers for 3.5 years. When I came back to doing glass, they looked just fine, so I used them, and luckily I didn't run into any issues with this project at all. Before we start soldering, there's one more thing we need to prep, and that's our wire. Let's go over the type of wire you'll need and how to get it ready for tinning. A few years ago, we had our electrical panel upgraded, which meant some of the wiring coming into the house was replaced. The main wire that would have been discarded, we kept. This is some of that main wire, which is a 4-gauge wire. And without the casing, this is what it looks like. If I peel off one of the smaller wires and measure it with my calipers, the conversion shows it's a 12-gauge wire. I like to use repurposed wire in many of my projects because I have access to it and it's a cost-effective option for me. However, you probably don't have this exact wire lying around. So where can you get it? You can buy 12-gauge wire at any hardware store that sells electrical wiring. Some stained glass supply stores may also carry certain types of wire. If you're purchasing electrical wire, just keep in mind that you'll need to remove the plastic shielding to access the copper inside. We'll also use a very small amount of finer wire, something closer to a 14-gauge. Again, you can use repurposed wire like me, or you can purchase some to use for this project. Another option for the stems is brass rod. These are easy to find on Amazon, and I'll leave a link in the description box for you. If you choose to use brass rod for this project, you can follow along with all the same tinning and soldering instructions that are shown in this tutorial. To clean the wire for soldering, emery cloth works very well, but steel wool will get the job done too. If you're using emery cloth like me, spray it with a little water before scrubbing along the length of the wire. Whichever method you're using, make sure to remove all oxidation from the copper. This is essential for properly tinning the wire. Tip number 5, focus on the joy of creating. At the end of the day, stained glass is about creativity and joy. Don't let fear or perfectionism hold you back. Enjoy the process, celebrate your progress, and most importantly, just get started. There are various ways to secure projects while soldering, but since these are small pieces with multiple parts, I wanted the flexibility to move them around. I decided to use paper tape to hold them in place. This particular tape is very sticky. So to prevent it from lifting the foil when I remove them later, I pressed them into the sleeve of my shirt a few times to pick up lint and remove some of the tackiness. By the way, if you'd like to make this project yourself, my pattern is available and you can find the link in the description below. Now I'm ready to solder. With our flowers soldered and ready for wire, let's finish prepping the wire. It's already been cleaned, so now I just need to straighten it. The easiest method I've found is to run my hand along the length of the wire with my wrist angled in one direction, then run my hand along it again with my wrist angled the opposite way. It takes multiple passes to achieve a straighter wire, but it works. Whenever I've tried bending it in sections, it tends to end up kinked rather than straight. So this is the method I use and tend to stick to. Next, I'll cut the wire to the desired length. I think 10 inches is a nice size for these, but you can make yours as long or as short as you'd like. Back to soldering. First, flux the copper wire, then hold it securely with pliers. Otherwise, you'll burn your fingers when the soldering iron heats it up. Touch the iron to the wire in one spot and let it heat up until the solder starts to flow. Since this wire is thick, it will take a few seconds for the heat to transfer. It won't be instant like when you're soldering copper foil. Once the solder starts to spread, slowly run the iron along the wire. If the solder feels gummy, you're moving too fast, so slow down. After one full pass, turn the wire and repeat the process until the entire surface is coated. You can flip the wire around and tin the other half right away or come back to it later. Once the whole wire is tinned, we're ready to attach it to the glass. Lay out all the pieces in their final positions. Apply a dab of flux where the flower and stem meet. Hold the stem against the flower. Then use the soldering iron to pick up a small ball of solder and drop it onto the attachment point, securing them together. Then you're going to repeat the process for each leaf. Gently flip the rows over and add solder to the back of each attachment point for extra stability. Now, be careful not to linger too long with the heat. If you overheat the solder, the piece may slip out of place, just like I do with the rows. If that happens, just allow it to cool, flip it over, and quickly touch it up. Finally, smooth out any excess solder along the edges. Then finish off any final touch-ups you want. Now, if you're working on a rose with leaves attached to the stem by wires, the process is nearly the same. First, place the wire along the length of the leaf and solder it in place, completely embedding the wire within the solder. Then, carefully bend the wire back just slightly so that the free end aligns with the stem when the leaf is placed on the work surface. This way, the two pieces of wire touch, making it easier to solder them together. Number 6, reconnect with the joy of finishing. The final steps of a project, whether it's applying patina, polishing, or adding a protective wax, are about more than just making it look nice. They're a reminder that you saw it through to the end. Even if it's not perfect, completing a project is a huge win. Take a moment to appreciate what you've made and let that satisfaction motivate you for your next piece. And that's it! Our stained glass roses are complete. I hope you found this tutorial helpful and that it inspires you to get creative with your own stained glass projects. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps. And if you'd like to see more stained glass tutorials, tips, and projects, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss anything. Next up, I'll be working on some simple butterfly sun catchers, perfect for beginners or anyone looking for a quick, fun project. So stay tuned for that. Thanks so much for watching and happy creating. See you next time.